I haven't slept in 6 days, and by that, I don't mean I've had poor sleep or a few restless nights, I mean my brain hasn't shut off once, not even for a second. It's like my body has forgotten how to do it. I've tried everything: melatonin, blackout curtains, no caffeine, white noise, hypnosis apps, even a sensory deprivation tank at some overpriced spa. Nothing worked. Every night, my body gets heavier, my thoughts start to blur into static, but sleep never comes. I lie there in a darkness that feels alive, a pulsing pressure against my eyes, until the sun rises and I drag my corpse to work, pretending I'm still tethered to the world like everyone else. But on the 6th night, with my hands shaking uncontrollably and the bags under my eyes taking on a sick yellow color, I found something. I wasn't even looking for it, I was half scrolling, half hallucinating through an old thread on r/no sleep, and someone had commented a single link with no upvotes, no replies, and a timestamp from 2 years ago. The link was to a site I'd never heard of, Insomnia Nocturna. The browser flashed a warning about unsecured access, but I clicked anyway. That was the first mistake. The site was unnerving from the moment it loaded, not because of flashy graphics or horror aesthetics, but because of how simple it was, just black text on a white screen with one message at the top: for those who truly can't sleep. No ads, no navigation bar, no usernames or avatars, just post after post in a language that felt like a whisper to the back of my skull. Most were short, like desperate journal entries: "It's been 12 days. The shadow is closer," or "I did the ritual. I dreamed, but it wasn't my dream." A few were longer, rambling descriptions of lucid nightmares, cryptic symbols, sleep that felt like drowning, and all of them ended the same way: silence. No replies. No updates. As I scrolled further down, I realized something was deeply wrong. Each thread had a user attached to it, except instead of a name, it just read, "removed." Some posts ended mid-sentence, as if the person had stopped typing and never returned. That's when I got the message. A small notification appeared in the bottom corner of the screen, but there was no interface, no inbox, just floating black text that faded in like a ghost on glass: "You were expected." I swear to you, and I know how insane this will sound, but when that message appeared, I felt something move behind me, not just a shift in the room or a trick of my tired eyes, but a distinct sensation, like someone leaning over my shoulder and breathing softly into my ear. I spun around in my desk chair so fast I nearly flipped it, but of course, the room was empty. The walls, dimly lit by the computer's glow, looked warped somehow, like the shadows had been smudged by an unseen hand. I backed away from the monitor, heart pounding, but my feet felt like they were stuck in syrup. That's when the second message appeared, and this time, it felt less like text and more like a voice threading itself into my thoughts: "If you're ready to sleep, the ritual begins tonight." My hand hovered over the mouse, debating whether to shut the whole thing down, but something, call it curiosity, call it desperation, maybe even something planted there by whatever had sent the message, kept me frozen. I clicked the message. The screen flickered, the lights in my room dimmed, and the page loaded a single post titled, "The Path to Sleep." I didn't know it then, but that night I opened something that was never meant to be opened, and I think I let something in. I should have closed the laptop and walked away the moment I saw that message, but instead, I clicked, because that's what desperation does. It makes you ignore every instinct screaming at you to run. The post titled "The Path to Sleep" wasn't long, but it felt ancient, like something that had existed before language, before thought. It didn't read like instructions, it read like a curse disguised as comfort. There were 3 steps. First, I had to light a single candle in the darkest room of my home exactly at 3:33 a.m. Second, I had to place a mirror directly in front of me and sit in complete silence for 13 minutes, never breaking eye contact with my reflection. And finally, at the end of the 13th minute, I was to speak my full name backwards 3 times without blinking. That was it. No explanation. No warning. Just a note at the bottom: "Do not leave the room until the flame dies on its own. If the mirror smiles, do not smile back." I stared at that line for a long time, unable to tell whether it was some twisted joke or something more insidious. But by then, my hands were already moving, gathering candles, dragging the mirror from my bathroom, watching the clock like it was counting down to something inevitable. The silence in my apartment had never felt so heavy, and every creak of the floorboard sounded like breath behind the walls. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I struck a match and lit the candle in the corner of my living room, the only space large enough to accommodate the mirror at eye level. The moment the flame took hold, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls, writhing like they were alive but paralyzed, an optical illusion, I told myself, the kind born from exhaustion and paranoia. I sat cross-legged, facing my own reflection, and began the countdown. For the first 3 or 4 minutes, nothing happened, unless you count the sensation of being watched by something standing just outside the edge of the glass. At minute 5, my nose began to bleed without warning, a slow drip that stained my shirt. At minute 8, the temperature in the room dropped so drastically I could see my own breath clouding the mirror. At minute 10, the flame bent sideways, completely horizontal, without a hint of breeze, and stayed there, pointing directly at the mirror. My reflection looked the same, but somehow, off. Not distorted, not glitched, just wrong. As the 13th minute struck, I spoke my name backwards 3 times, my voice barely a whisper, the syllables twisted and foreign on my tongue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the reflection blinked. Only the reflection. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until I heard the distinct sound of air being inhaled, coming not from my mouth, but from behind the glass. My chest froze. I wanted to look away, but the instructions were burned into my mind. I couldn't break eye contact. I couldn't blink. And then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, my reflection began to smile, not a soft or natural smile, but a warped, crescent-shaped grin that split far too wide across its face, revealing rows of teeth I didn't have. The skin around its eyes tightened, pulling back into something animalistic, and I remembered the warning, if the mirror smiles, do not smile back. But as hard as I tried, I felt the corners of my mouth twitching, almost like my muscles were no longer mine. The flame suddenly flickered violently, casting the entire room into a strobe of darkness and light, and then, just like that, it went out. I was swallowed by total blackness. And in the last second before the mirror vanished into shadow, I saw my reflection reach toward the glass, not with my hand, but something longer. Bonier. That night, I slept for the first time in nearly a week. I woke up 12 hours later, feeling rested, whole, and horribly, horribly wrong. When I finally woke up the next day, or maybe it was the same day and I had just crossed some invisible line in time, sunlight poured through the window in thick, golden sheets, and for a few beautiful seconds, I felt human again. The headache that had become a permanent fixture behind my eyes was gone. My limbs didn't ache like stone weights tied to bone. My thoughts didn't spiral endlessly like a broken carousel. I felt normal. I felt rested. But as I sat up and looked around the room, that peace evaporated. The candle I'd lit for the ritual had melted into a pool of hardened wax, which made sense, but the mirror, the same mirror that had smiled at me, that had blinked without my permission, was shattered into a dozen clean pieces, all of them still propped up in the same position I'd left it in, like something had broken it from the inside out. Every shard reflected something slightly different, a room that was almost mine, but not quite. The furniture was in the same place, but the lighting was wrong, a bit too dim, a bit too yellow, and the ceiling fan was spinning even though mine was still. I picked up one of the shards and watched, breath caught in my throat, as a shadow passed across its surface, fast, deliberate, and definitely not mine. I logged back into Insomnia, Nocturna almost automatically, like it had rewired my brain to seek it out again, and that's when I noticed the change. The homepage, once crawling with strange and desperate posts, was now nearly silent. The most recent entries, all from within the last week, were gone. Not deleted, not hidden behind error messages, but removed, the username scrubbed clean and replaced by blank gray boxes where user data should have been. I scrolled through thread after thread, each one posted by someone who had spoken to me only days ago, sharing their own insomnia experiences, detailing minor variations in the ritual, begging for help after seeing something in the mirror. Every one of those users had vanished, their posts locked, and a single word now stamped at the top of each thread like a warning label: absorbed. At first, I assumed it was part of the site's cryptic aesthetic, but then I saw the user at null night, the same person who had sent me the ritual, was now gone. Their profile returned a 404 error, and all of their posts were marked as finalized. One post in particular caught my attention, not because of the content, but because it was dated 3 years ago, far earlier than when I joined, and it had the exact same ritual I had followed, word for word, down to the line about the smiling reflection. As I read further, a cold dread began to build in my chest, rising slowly like floodwater. Hidden near the bottom of the thread, among hundreds of replies that had since been locked, someone had posted an image, grainy, overexposed, almost too dark to make anything out, but I knew what it was. It was a photograph of a person asleep in bed, limbs unnaturally still, with long shadows creeping up the wall behind them like spider legs. The person's face had been scratched out violently, but their username was tagged in the post, a name I recognized as one of the most active users just days ago. I clicked their profile. Account deactivated. Another image, deeper in the thread, showed a mirror with a face pressed to the inside of the glass, grinning wide with eyes too large and black as oil. It looked just like me. But it wasn't me. The timestamp on that post was from the future, exactly 5 days from now. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse a dull drumbeat in my ears, until a notification popped up in the bottom corner of the screen again, the same eerie way it had the first time. No sender. No reply option. Just 6 chilling words. You have been marked for sleep. The moment I saw those words, you have been marked for sleep, something inside me shifted, like a rope had tightened deep in my chest, pulling taut with the kind of quiet panic that doesn't scream, doesn't claw, but waits and watches. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank, some dark roleplay thread on a forgotten corner of the internet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the ritual, something that now lived in the shadows of my apartment, curling just out of sight, breathing softly from the vents, the closets, the seams between the floorboards. That night, as I tried to go to sleep without the ritual, something new happened, something I still can't fully explain. Every time I blinked, the darkness around me seemed to shift. Not grow or shrink, but rearrange. Lamps moved a few inches. My closet door creaked further open with each blink, even though I hadn't touched it. The air buzzed with a low, invisible hum like static being funneled through my teeth. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in any sane reality. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. More like the impression of a voice, spoken not into my ears, but behind my thoughts. It whispered just 3 words, "We see you." The next day, sleep-deprived and rattled, I returned to the forum out of instinct, like someone returning to the scene of a crime they committed in a dream. The site looked different. Glitched. As if it had aged decades overnight. The background flickered between white and black at irregular intervals. Some text was unreadable, written in a jagged red font that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. But what truly froze me was the discovery of a new section, something that hadn't existed before. It was locked behind a broken menu tab that now read, "The Wakeful Ones." There was no password, no prompt. Just a spinning, eye-shaped icon that opened when I hovered my cursor over it. Inside was a single post, titled "The Price of Sleep." The writing was different, manic, almost ritualistic, full of strange symbols and words stitched together like a prayer carved into skin. It spoke of ancient entities that fed not on flesh or blood, but on wakefulness itself, harvesting the time between thought and rest, tunneling into the minds of those who couldn't sleep until they became hollowed out, not dead, but erased. The worst part? The post ended with a list of usernames, the same ones I had seen vanish. And at the very bottom of that list, glowing faintly, was mine. From that moment on, my life began to unravel like string pulled from the edge of a fraying sweater. The lights in my apartment would flicker and then die, only to return seconds later with no explanation. My reflection no longer matched my movements exactly, there was always a split-second delay, as if it were buffering reality. My phone began vibrating at odd hours with no notifications, and when I answered my calls, there was nothing but breathing, slow, calm, deliberate. I recorded it once, just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining it, but when I played it back, the audio was gone, replaced by a warped melody that sounded almost like a lullaby played backward through a detuned radio. That night, while lying in bed with my eyes wide open, I felt something brush against my foot beneath the sheets. I kicked violently and threw back the covers, nothing was there. But when I looked down, a message had been etched into the flesh of my ankle, written in blood as if with a needle. Do not sleep without us. It happened the night I refused the ritual. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, the candle untouched on my dresser, the mirror face down under a towel like some ancient relic I was too afraid to destroy but too terrified to face again. I told myself I wouldn't do it, not this time. Not after what I saw in the wakeful one's thread. I wasn't going to feed them, not again. But you don't get to walk away once you've been marked, and I should have known that. The silence in my apartment felt wrong that night, not peaceful, but predatory, like the air itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, my walls began to creak in slow, calculated intervals, as if something was pacing on the other side of the drywall, dragging long limbs from corner to corner with deliberate intent. I stayed completely still, frozen under the covers, sweat pooling along my spine, and then, just past 2 a.m., I blinked. And it was there. It stood in the hallway just beyond my open bedroom door, tall enough to nearly scrape the ceiling, its body hunched at a crooked angle that defied anatomy but not intent. Its skin was impossibly pale, stretched thin like damp paper over bone, and its arms hung lower than they should have, jointed wrong, ending in long fingers that twitched rhythmically as if tapping to some unheard metronome. But the worst part, the part that will haunt me until my last breath, was its face. Or rather, the absence of one. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, no expression, just smooth, quivering flesh, like something still in the process of becoming human but unfinished, unformed. I couldn't move. My limbs refused me. The air grew thick and metallic, tasting like rust and burnt plastic, and every instinct in my body screamed to look away, but I couldn't. It didn't walk toward me. It didn't run. It blinked. I swear to you, it blinked, and in the time it took for me to exhale, it was standing inside my bedroom, arms slack at its sides, the scent of mold and decay rolling off its skin like steam. Then it tilted its head, not curiously, but with a twitching, insect-like snap, and I knew without understanding how that it was studying me. Not through sight, but through some deeper sense, something that didn't require eyes to see. And then, without a word or a sound, it reached one hand toward the floor and dragged a single finger along the wooden planks, leaving a trail of black ichor that hissed and bubbled like acid as it soaked into the grain. My eyes burned. My vision doubled. But I didn't dare blink. Not again. When the candle, the one I had left untouched, suddenly ignited on its own, the creature hissed, recoiled, and in an instant, vanished. No footsteps. No sound. Just gone. I sat there until dawn, paralyzed with fear, staring at the black streak seared into the floorboards. And as sunlight crept across the room, I looked toward the dresser, and saw that the mirror had turned itself upright. And in the reflection, I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep the next night. I couldn't. Every sound in the apartment felt like a coded warning, every creak in the floorboards, every pop in the walls, every sigh of the wind through the cracked kitchen window. I kept the lights on, every single one, and sat with my back to the corner of the room where nothing could approach without me seeing it. I thought I might have been going insane, I hoped I was. Because insanity meant it wasn't real. But I kept returning to the forum, like a compulsion, like something inside me was urging me back there with invisible hands around my throat. And that's when I found something that hadn't been there before, or maybe it had, hidden in the code, waiting until I was vulnerable enough to notice. On the homepage, under the old Rules for Rituals section, was a new thread, unlabeled, with no title. I clicked on it without thinking, and the screen turned black for several seconds, as if the site were loading something massive. Then the page lit up, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. It was a list, a long, vertical wall of usernames, cascading down the page like an obituary carved into digital stone. Some were bright white, glowing faintly against the black background, while others were dimmed out, flickering or entirely redacted. The ones at the very bottom pulsed like dying embers. I scrolled, my fingers trembling, watching name after name pass by, many of which I recognized from posts I'd read, people I'd spoken to. The deeper I went, the more corrupted the page became, fonts glitching, colors bleeding outside the lines, fragments of sentences wedged between usernames like fragmented cries for help. He's inside the wall now, don't blink if you see her in the glass, your dreams are feeding it. And then I saw mine. My own username. It was there. Lit. Alive. Active. But right beneath it, in faded gray, was a countdown, 5 days. 5 days, and then, nothing. I didn't know what would happen when the timer hit 0, but I knew it wouldn't be sleep. Not the kind that ends with dreams. More like the kind you don't wake up from. I tried to post. I tried to message someone, anyone. I clicked on a familiar name, someone I'd seen active just the day before, a user called Nightfeeder7 who had been sharing updates about a new ritual they'd tried involving whispered phrases and an old clock. But when I opened their profile, it was blank. No posts. No threads. No trace. And yet, right as I was about to close the tab, something loaded. A single image. It showed a wall, cracked, gray, crumbling, and embedded in it, barely visible under layers of decay and shadow, was a human face, pale and screaming, eyes wide and empty like glass. The file name was simply, Next. When I backed out, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the wall behind me, above my bookshelf, someone, or something, had carved a symbol into the plaster. A spiraling eye with jagged, ink-black lashes. I don't remember hearing anything, but I swear I felt it happening, the slow gouge of something sharp dragging along the wall, carving into my reality. I touched the symbol. It was wet. Still bleeding. That night, something changed. Not in the usual, creeping way the horrors had been slipping into my life, not through whispers or glitched screens or subtle rearrangements of my reflection, but violently, like a switch had been flipped and something that had been watching from a distance decided it was time to get closer. I had just shut my laptop and pulled the curtains shut, still shaken from the bleeding symbol carved above my bookshelf, when I noticed the air in my apartment had grown unusually dense, like I had stepped underwater without realizing it. The lights began to dim, not flickering but draining, slowly, unnaturally, as if the bulbs were dying not from power loss but from fear. And then came the smell, a sulphurous, rotting stench that crawled through the vents and clung to my walls. I moved to the window, desperate to pull it open for air, and froze. Outside, in the alley below, a figure was standing motionless beneath the flickering street lamp. At first, I thought it was someone in a coat, maybe a neighbor, until the light flared for a brief second and I saw its skin, pale gray, hairless, and stretched too tightly over a hunched, elongated frame. The moment I looked at it, its head snapped upward. It had no eyes, but somehow, I knew it saw me. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs, and every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. My body felt sedated, like I was already halfway into a dream that wasn't mine. That's when the whispering started again, louder this time, closer. It came from behind the mirror. I hadn't moved it since the last ritual, still afraid to touch it, but now it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the glass. The whispers weren't English anymore, they weren't even human. They scratched at the edges of my comprehension, layered and inhuman, like several people trying to speak at once with mouths full of dirt. I grabbed my phone and began recording, desperate to prove to myself this was real, but the moment I hit record, the screen glitched violently and then displayed a new message, recording disabled. He is present. That's when the doorknob to my bedroom began to turn slowly, rhythmically, like someone on the other side was testing the lock, not trying to break in, just letting me know they could. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I woke up outside. Not in my hallway. Not on the floor. Outside, barefoot, standing in the middle of the street, under that same flickering street lamp where the figure had stood hours before. My body was stiff, my fingers bruised like I'd been clenching something in my sleep. When I looked down, my palms were streaked in black, sticky residue, not ink, not blood, but something thicker. I turned back toward my apartment and saw my own bedroom window wide open, curtains swaying gently, and behind the glass, was me. Or something that looked like me, just standing there, motionless. Watching. I stumbled back inside, terrified, mind racing, and found my phone buzzing on the floor. A new notification pulsed on the screen from an anonymous sender: "You broke protocol. He has entered. Sleep will not protect you anymore." I don't know what sleep is anymore. It doesn't feel like rest, like safety, like drifting into that soft oblivion where dreams are made. It feels more like surrender, like I'm handing over something vital, piece by piece, every time I close my eyes. After waking up in the street and seeing my double in the window, I stopped trusting reality entirely. Everything that followed felt like a slow descent into madness, but I knew, that something was still watching me from behind the veil. The forum, once full of whispers and rituals and strange threads, had started falling apart completely. Posts vanished the second I clicked them. The site flickered with static, sometimes showing symbols that didn't translate, glyphs that pulsed on the screen like they were alive. And the music, that's when things truly began to unravel. My playlist, the one I always used to try and lull myself into unconsciousness, had changed. One night, I let it autoplay as I sat in bed, too afraid to close my eyes, and a new track began playing. One I hadn't added. One with no title. At first, it was nothing but a low hum, almost imperceptible, like white noise buried beneath static, but the longer I listened, the more it began to shift. The hum formed into a tune, off-tempo and dissonant, like a nursery rhyme played on warped vinyl, slowing down as it looped. I tried to skip it, but every time I tapped my screen, it didn't respond. The track just kept playing. Then, layered beneath the melody, I heard something else, faint breathing, too close to the microphone, as if someone were hiding in the speaker and exhaling directly into my ears. And then came the voice. It was my voice. Not similar. Not close. It was me, whispering things I couldn't remember ever recording, things I would never say: "Don't fight it. It's already inside. Just let it finish." I ripped the headphones from my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It kept playing, from the walls, from the vents, from the floorboards, until it all suddenly cut off. And in its absence, there was only silence. Not quiet, silence. The kind that swallows sound completely, where your heartbeat feels too loud and the movement of your eyes sounds like footsteps echoing inside your skull. I fled into the hallway, needing air, needing anything else, but the building had changed. The lights were all off, humming dimly as if running on a dying battery, and every door was closed, even the ones I knew had been left open. There was no sound from the other apartments. No television. No arguments. No life. Just silence. I took the stairs, counting every step, hoping the motion would keep me grounded, but when I reached the ground floor and opened the exit door, I wasn't outside. I was in a hallway. Another hallway. One I'd never seen before. It stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with mirrors on both sides. Every mirror showed a different version of me, sleeping, screaming, missing pieces. In one, my mouth had been sewn shut. In another, my eyes were gouged out, and hands were pressed against the inside of the glass, trying to get out. That's when I heard it. A lullaby. That same warped tune, now echoing down the corridor, accompanied by footsteps, slow, dragging, coming closer. I didn't wait to see what was coming. I ran. And behind me, every mirror began to crack. I don't remember how I got back to my apartment. I just know I ran until my legs gave out, my vision smeared with tears and sweat, lungs burning like they were being crushed from the inside. When I collapsed against the door and fumbled for the keys, the hallway behind me was still silent, but that kind of silence felt deceptive now, like a trap sprung in reverse. Once inside, I locked every bolt, pushed furniture against the doors and windows, ripped the mirror from the wall and smashed it into shards until nothing reflective remained. I pulled the router's plug, yanked out the modem, crushed my phone under a hammer, and even turned off the breaker, just to sever every line that could connect me to them. For hours, I sat in the dark, rocking in place, telling myself it was over. No more rituals. No more messages. No more voices. But it was a lie I couldn't believe even as I whispered it to myself. I should have known, disconnecting didn't save me. If anything, it made me easier to reach. Because the moment I closed my eyes, the silence spoke. Not with sound, but with presence. Something filled the room like thick fog, no shape, no form, just pressure, like the air itself had become heavy with breath I couldn't see. I felt it settle on me, around me, inside me, like a second skin made of shadow. When I opened my eyes again, everything was the same, my living room untouched, my blood-stained hands still trembling, but something was wrong with the windows. They no longer showed the street outside. Instead, they stared into another room. My room. But wrong. Like a simulation running a few seconds out of sync, filled with versions of myself doing things I wasn't doing, brushing teeth I hadn't brushed, blinking when I hadn't blinked, sleeping when I was very much awake. And in one of those windows, I turned toward me and smiled. Not kindly. Not humanly. And then the lights in that version of my room began to flicker rapidly, not Morse code, not a glitch, but a pattern I recognized from the wakeful one's forum. A pattern that translated into one phrase, only one left to silence. That was when the laptop, still unplugged, still without power, lit up on its own. The screen turned on, slowly, like something waking from deep beneath the surface. My desktop was gone, replaced by a single, full-screen terminal window that pulsed like a heartbeat. Letters began to appear, one after another, typed by invisible fingers, and I couldn't stop reading. We are almost done. You are the last door. Once you close your eyes, we enter. And beneath those lines, a timer began to count down from 60 seconds. I tried everything, I unplugged the battery, closed the lid, smashed it against the wall, but the screen stayed on, glowing like a lighthouse for something that shouldn't be allowed to find its way here. I collapsed to the floor, whispering nonsense prayers, staring at the countdown as it reached single digits. When it hit 0, the screen went dark. And in the reflection of the black glass, I saw not me, but a pale hand rising slowly behind my shoulder. When the pale hand touched my shoulder, I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked up like it had been filled with concrete, and my body simply shut down, collapsing onto the floor like a puppet whose strings had been snipped all at once. The screen of the laptop remained black, but the reflection continued, a pale version of me staring directly into my eyes from a space that shouldn't have existed. I wanted to believe it was over then, that the nightmare had reached its peak, that whatever the wakeful ones wanted from me had been extracted, absorbed, consumed, but I was wrong. That was only the point of entry. When I woke up, if you can call it waking, I was not in my apartment. I was in a perfect replica of it, eerily sterile and deathly quiet, like a film set built from memory. Nothing had weight. Nothing had smell. Even the shadows fell in the wrong direction, stretching toward the light instead of away from it. Every surface I touched felt hollow, like painted cardboard, and the windows didn't show the outside, only a blank, infinite gray void, shifting and rippling as if something enormous moved just beyond the edges of perception. There was a mirror on the wall again. Of course there was. But this time, when I approached it, there was no reflection at all, only a black screen with text slowly typing itself across the glass. Congratulations. You are the last. The forum is now closed. Your account will be archived. And beneath those lines, a list began to scroll. Every username I had seen before, now struck through, one by one, in a never-ending procession of digital graves. Mine was the last. Still untouched. Still glowing. Still awake. That's when I realized what had really happened. The rituals weren't about sleep, they were about removal. A harvest. One that needed willing participants to invite it in. And once someone completed the ritual, they didn't rest, they were rewritten. Pulled into this faceless space between waking and oblivion, where consciousness is swallowed and memories fracture into echoes. I wasn't just the final sleeper. I was the final thread. The last open connection. And in some unspeakable way, I had become the new gateway. Because when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection had returned. But it wasn't me. It was someone else. Someone terrified. Someone performing the ritual. Right now. So if you're hearing this, if somehow this story reached you, I need you to understand something, this isn't just a story. The forum may be gone, the countdown may be finished, but the signal still lives. In reflections. In silence. In the seconds between thoughts, where the wakeful ones slip through. Don't look in the mirror too long. Don't play unfamiliar music at night. And above all, don't follow links you don't understand. If you've seen them already, it may be too late. But maybe, just maybe, you're not the only one. Have you seen them, too? Let me know. Before your screen goes dark.